Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Está empezando el show del doctor Roy Aranda, donde abordaremos temas sobre separación niños de padres, casos de violencia, traumas con los indocumentados, cómo resistir ante tiempos de pandemias. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus propias preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, my dear Tribuna TV viewers. Buenas noches, queridos televidentes de la siempre famosísima Tribuna TV. I modified it a little bit. I said it's always famous, Tribuna TV. Minor little adjustment there. So, well, today we're approaching the end of August. It's amazing. I have as a guest my consultant and frequent contributor, Dr. Peter Canaris, and Peter, it just seems like it was such a short time ago that we were talking about what more or less how we ended 2021 and what the expectations were for 2022. And here we are. We're getting close to the end of April. I hope I didn't say August.
You mentioned August, but
April, yes. No, I was thinking about my anniversary, my fourth anniversary, for dear viewers. El cuarto aniversario va a ser a finales de agosto. We'll be at the end of August, so I had August on my mind. I'm still okay. My reality testing is still intact. We are at the end of April, okay, but still, it's a good 4 months later. Where are we at this point in time? So today is April 28, Abril 28, and I do have, as I mentioned, my consultant and guest today as a contributor. And we have a show that, as usual, I think that the viewers are aware that many of the themes, although they touch upon circumstances of life that may be difficult, that present challenges and hardships, that the whole purpose of it for me has been all of these years to try to provide an educational outreach, an educational component to my viewers, to enable them to become more empowered and more aware of what kinds of things are out there, to correct misconceptions, to learn what is available to them, what kinds of tools or techniques or remedies or coping kinds of strategies are available and recommendations so that they can improve the quality, not only improve the quality of their lives and the lives of their family and children and loved ones and friends, but also to make sure that their environment is safer, that the life that they lead, which I strongly believe is something that we should have enjoyment in life. We have challenges, but there's no reason why every day you have to wake up and there's another challenge that day. It should be you wake up and what am I going to do to enjoy the day today? And that's kind of the spirit, Peter, that I try to instill in my patients as well. They are many, as you know, you have them as well, patients who have suffered illnesses and injuries and trauma, and it's like almost every day becomes a bit of a challenge. And I says, wait a second, you don't have to dwell on the challenge all the time. Switch the record, turn it over, put the other side on, build a different scenario, build a different trauma kind of a narrative. I am going to empower myself today. I am going to enrich myself today. I am going to enjoy the day today. So we have a theme for today. The title of the show for today is War, Crime, and Terrorism, the Violence on Our Minds. And I'll get to it in a moment in terms of why I wanted to do this. And immediately after the reason that prompted my wanting to do this, that I'll share with you momentarily, I communicated with Peter and I said, Peter, I have to do this show. And you have to be on it. so Peter said, okay. All right, I'm going to rise to the occasion. So for the sake of the viewers, para que sepan todos los televidentes, the show is being recorded live. right now on YouTube. And it's live on Tribuna TV, and it's being recorded on YouTube. By tomorrow, there'll be a recording available, of course, on YouTube, Tribuna TV's website, Vimeo, which is a hosting site, Facebook, and probably other electronic and social media kinds of platforms. I'll make sure that I look for it, and I'll post it, and I'm pretty sure that Peter will post it as well. For the sake of viewers who are not able to be present today, I always want them to have an opportunity to watch it at some point in time. We have several slides for today. As usual, I try to make it educational, and I put informative slides that I encourage all of you to either take photos while it's live or wait for the recording, and you can take screenshots. But I encourage you to do that, and you can store them away or save them for later access. At the end of the show, as usual, I provide resources for all of you as well if you need to follow up with questions or further information. So that said, Oscar, I wanted to acknowledge Oscar, my producer. Without Oscar is the person responsible for organizing the slides and pretty much doing the show. So he's a very important person to me. Don Oscar, si quieres saludar a los televidentes. Okay, so that said, why don't we get started? Oscar, por favor, me pones el primer slide, and I'll go over it. So here we see, the rationale for why I wanted to do this. And, I've certainly dealt with violence and hatred and shows that pertain to acts of discrimination and disasters before. So it's not the first time. But here, we have following the subway shooting in Brooklyn. It wasn't a shoot. Well, it was an attack. It was an attack and a shooting that took place on April 12. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, oh my God, it brought back so many memories, and it brought back memories, and it heightened memories of other horrific events. And I thought to myself, it's so difficult to stomach this. And it had come only a few days after the show that I did recently on Ukraine and the impact of viewing the horrors of what's taking place in Ukraine, even here in the United States, to children. When they see this, and it's not just Ukraine, although Ukraine is like nonstop, incessant array of graphic videos, images, losses, the horrors and the devastation happening to children, and of course, all the the adults, the elderly, the infirm as well. And you cannot help but turn the TV on or your phone, and you immediately see something that's there, that's available, depicting breaking news, interviews of people, showing the graphic images. And we saw this after 9/11. People were traumatized. It's called vicarious traumatization. First responders, people who are there on the scene, helping out, survivors, people who are watching on TV and video and on their phones and tablets. After a while, they become traumatized from seeing this over and over again. And children are not little adults. Children live in sort of like a magical world, depending on how old they are. And they were very affected. So soon after that, I knew that I had to do this show with the intent of trying to help my viewers. So violence permeates our lives. There's a wave of violence. We see violence-related news every day. Violence has been on the rise. Homicide rates have soared nationwide. Violence rears its ugly head in many contexts. It seeks to grip all aspects of our existence. Peter and I were going to show slides depicting faces of violence, several images from past incidents, facts about violence that I think are important for the viewers to know these. The impact of violence to children and adults, prevalent emotional disorders following acts of violence. We've talked about this on a number of occasions before. So for some people, it'll be repeat. For others, it'll be first time. But I think it's always important to touch base on these kinds of things. Crisis intervention. What do you do immediately in the aftermath? You had an explosion. What do you do immediately after the explosion from a psychological standpoint? Obviously, physicians and people that are first responders will do something a little bit differently, saving lives, preventing bleeding, making sure that people are breathing. Obviously that comes first. But there is something that's known as emotional first aid. What are the first kinds of psychological interventions that people like Peter and I and people in the mental health profession need to do to those people who are traumatized immediately after a violent incident or some sort of a disaster? Psychological treatments, concepts of resilience, post-traumatic growth that we have talked about. I know Peter wants to address this at greater length today. Risk reduction and management, which is a takeaway that I think is so important for my viewers to really, really hammer in and learn and sort of like, if not memorize it, really, really, it should become like secondhand nature. You need to learn that if you're walking outside and you're crossing the street, it's not the best time to sit there texting on your cell phone. Driving is not your best time to pick up a phone and be responding on the phone. There's just some things that are very common sense, like what I'm mentioning now. Other things may not be that obvious, which is why I really want to bring home concepts of risk reduction and management. As always, I've been dedicating the show. Today, the dedication is to all viewers who have been affected by the violence that has become a plague in our society. Puedes sacar el slide. Peter, anything to add to that fairly long introduction?
Well, Roy, when you invited me again to be on the show, I was excited in particular because it brought back memories of my years of working at APA, American Psychological Association, the public education campaign. I was the representative from New York State, and we had a number of initiatives that we wanted to educate the public about psychology, but all of the initiatives seemed to be generated from violent things in our society, in our lives. The very first one, all the way back, was you remember the massacre at Columbine High School in Colorado that led to a warning signs of violence initiative. Then shortly after that, we had 9/11. And from 9/11, there was an initiative called the Road to Resilience. And tonight, I'd like to be able to return to some of those concepts that people found very helpful on the heels of those kinds of disasters, and the knowledge that, those kinds of things can happen, but we can be resilient. We can bounce back, and I look forward to us being able to talk about.
Well, that's the main message. I want people to learn symptoms, consequences, potential diagnosable disorders. They can be subclinical. It doesn't mean that it has to rise to the level of a diagnostic disease or illness or mental illness. But it's still something that you walk around feeling sad. You need to understand why and what to try to do to overcome it. People also, many, the adults with children, they're in a situation of being caretakers and responsible, and the children look up to them as models and a source of security. Yet how do you cope with your own feelings of depression, anxiety, insecurity, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, confusion, and want to at the same time be a pillar of support and strength for them?
Yeah.
It can become overwhelming, all of these demands. Also, you had mentioned that we look at and tend to focus on the violence, and I would also point out that if the viewers, they tend to look at turn on the news or look at a newspaper, you're going to see the disaster first. And somewhere on page 4, you'll see the police officer that helped deliver a baby on the Brooklyn Bridge. That you're going to see that like a couple of pages away. And themes that are very difficult and problematic and high profile. They get repeated over and over and over again. And some of the things, and that, by the way, the things that are positive by far outnumber the things that are negative. It's just that we're not seeing it because we're not exposed to it, because the media tends to slant in a direction that readers are going to want to look at. And of course, they're interested in sales and in marketing and in getting awards and things like that. And I'm not going to say negative things about that. But of course, that would be a motivation for some aspects of what we're seeing. Human beings.
Roy, just to mention, in talking about the news, how the news has changed over the years from what used to be a reporting of the news, a reporting of the events with some commentary, and it would be sort of segmented. It'd be in the morning or at 6 o'clock or at 11 o'clock, certain times. Now you get that 24/7 bathing of these upsetting events.
Yeah.
And news moved into the realm of entertainment. So they want to entertain you and grab your attention, on the news. And one way that happens is by a constant blaring of all of these negative and shocking kinds of events. So we're really exposed to it far more than we were years back.
Yeah, it's also repeated over and over and over again. And it's under the guise of breaking news. And you look at it and you say, well, I heard this yesterday.
Yes,
I heard it the day before, but you're still playing it. And some of the things that are questionable in terms of accuracy, you hear them often enough, and that element of false news, repeat false news often enough, and it becomes truth.
Yes.
And then people rely on that as, well, I heard this, so it must be true. And then you are really endorsing something that is incorrect, but you've heard it so often, it must be true. I remember also when we're talking about this thing about, looking and the reinforcement of negatives. Shortly after I had, gotten my license, I was an older teenager. I remember driving home. I lived with my parents then, and I went across probably I was on the Whitestone. I'm guessing the Whitestone Expressway, Van Wyck or somewhere. And I saw a body lying on the ground, and there were cop cars and people were slowing down to look, like there was a slowdown. Obviously, they needed to slow down because there were emergency vehicles, but it didn't account for the slowing down on the opposite side of the road. There were no emergency vehicles on the opposite side of the road. People were slowing down to look. And I remember, I did too. And for some reason, that image, even now as I'm speaking, I'm sort of able to visualize the body and to see it. It had an impact on me, and it sort of led me to understand and appreciate this rubbernecking effect. I didn't know what it was called then, but this rubbernecking effect that we tend to look. There's a voyeuristic quality about us. We look for these things, and I think that to a certain extent, it provides a measure of reassurance to us that we are safe and it did not happen to us. Because it happened to them or to him or to her, it's not going to happen to me. And it provides that false sense of security until and when that bubble bursts. Oscar, por favor, el slide número 2, slide 2. This was the motivation of doing the show. I was deeply moved by the news about another incomprehensible act of mass terrorism that rocked us on April 12, 2022. the Brooklyn 36th Street Station subway attack, and knew I had to do a show soon after, hopefully, to be of assistance to my viewers who were and are affected by and have to cope with violence in their lives. And there's a picture that was taken by a bystander, well, by somebody who was there, someone not injured, but with the camera up. Puede sacar el slide. So I knew then that this is something that, obviously there's going to be a lot of people affected. And in fact, Peter, I was correct, at least in my world as a psychologist, by contact with patients. I was being told, many of my patients brought it up. They were aware of it. Some who ignored it are the patients who are overly traumatized by the news to begin with because of their own frailties in life, their own vulnerabilities, medical illnesses. They have difficulty tolerating toxic kinds of news. So with some of them, they were not aware of it because they don't watch it. And I pretty much tell them, you need to have some awareness of the news. You have to be aware of what's going on. You have to be aware if there's a mask mandate or not. Some things you need to know. But you don't need to sit there spending hours and hours watching it. So for some of my patients, they said, well, I don't want to go anywhere now. I don't want to travel. I had one female patient who had to travel to go to see her therapy by taking a subway. Another one had to travel taking the bus. And, these people now are indicating, I'm sort of disinclined to want to do it. I want to see if I can get a ride. I decided not to go anywhere this week. I'm going to wait and see what happens. I'm not sure what that wait and see what happens means, because many of my patients also with COVID were telling me I'm going to wait and see what happens in terms of whether or not they were going to get a booster shot or the second shot. I'm going to wait and see what happens if I'm going to vaccinate my children. It was always this, I'm going to wait and see what happens. And I would sit there, Peter, and think to myself, by the time you wait and see what happens, if it affects you or your child, it's a little too late, isn't it?
Yeah.
At that point, it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this was what I was dealing with. And one of the slides, Oscar, por favor, I have some slides I want to go through quickly of some past episodes that may have been burned and etched into the brains of some of our viewers, depending on their ages. Por favor, Oscar, el número 3. So, faces of violence. I think that this, I don't believe there's anyone who's not aware of the left, 9/11. The two pictures on the right were taken by an airplane hovering or going across ground zero. Now, these were provided to me by a dear friend of mine for over 20 years now, retired Captain Terrence Ravella. And he was the highest ranking officer on the scene. And he stayed there for quite a while, helping to coordinate the rescue efforts. And I was involved with him in going to Ground Zero on many, many occasions, and helping with some of his officers who were traumatized, and in doing presentations. And throughout the years, I maintained very close contact with him. On the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which was this past 9/11, I did a special show to commemorate it. And he was a guest, and these were some of the photos that he provided me. They were taken from their private photos. He has about 400 private photos that were never published, that he's shown some of them to me. And I just wanted to share that a little bit and give him a shout out. Also, I had had a Emma, who was a guest on that 20th anniversary as well. And she was a victim on both attacks to the World Trade Center, the one in 1993, she was on the North Tower, and on 9/11 again on the North Tower. And she told her story. And in terms of some of the consequences now, where we're talking about travel anxiety and some symptoms, you can hardly call these, Peter, after 20 plus years, lingering symptoms. She reached a point that when she takes public transportation, she avoided it for the longest time. And when she would take public transport, she avoided subways. When she took buses, and then when she had no choice but to take the subway, she would always sit as close as she could to the bus. She would pack her heels, her dress shoes, in a bag for work, and she wore sneakers. And she told me that she did that in case she had to run, in case she had to get out and escape. She could not be out on the street anywhere in the area where the planes would land, the approaching pattern, the approaching landing pattern to LaGuardia Airport. If she was in that area, it traumatized her. She could not be in that area. She had many, many ongoing symptoms, and she did say something that struck me as very important and as a source of hope. She said that every morning she gets up, she sees the sun, or it's daylight, and she says, "Thank God for another day." And again, that's the type of message that I want to convey. There is something above and beyond. The picture underneath that, this was the Boston Marathon bombing that took place on April 15, 2013. I don't want to get into too much details. I just wanted to show it. It's been recently in the news in terms of the younger bomber. Por favor, Oscar, el número 4. I'm going to try to go through, Peter, some of these slides fairly quickly, and then we'll get into treatment, these violence and treatment strategies and, some of the other things. Here, this top picture, a white supremacist shooter entered Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina. This was June 17, 2015, began shooting. 6 men, 3 women were killed. This is one of the deadliest church attacks in U.S. history. Underneath that, this was horrific. I was president of New York State Psychological Association back then, Peter, and you may recall I actually issued a presidential statement because of this on the NISPA website. A gunman opened fire at Pulse nightclub, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, on June 12, 2016, killing 49 people, injuring 53. What was very remarkable, not only the fact that we're talking about LGBTQ, but majority of them were also Hispanics. So there were a lot of issues pertaining to how do you work with Latinos, and how do you work with people who are gay, and how do you work with people who happen to be gay Latinos in terms of rendering first aid, and where does the state go with this, and what does the country do with this? Underneath that, this was recently, we heard about this fairly recently in terms of a civil lawsuit. You may recall it was a huge, huge finding in favor of the plaintiffs. At the Unite the Right white supremacist and neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, marchers chanted racist and anti-Semitic slogans and carried symptoms of anti-Muslim groups. This occurred October 11, 12, 2017. I think I was chair of the Disaster Resource Network, then DRN, and New York State Psychological Association. Either I was chair or on it, I'm not sure, but there was 3 of us, 3 members, and Sharon Brennan, Evie Rappaport, and myself and I. We were actually invited to go over to try to help counselors who were overwhelmed with the need of providing psychological first aid and support. It didn't come through. There were reasons for it. It didn't come through, but we were certainly ready to go and pitch in. Por favor, Oscar, el 5. So here we have the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh was targeted in a mass shooting on October 27, 2018. 11 worshipers were killed. Beneath that, 20 people were killed and more than 24 injured in El Paso, Texas on August 3, 2019, when a 21-year-old man who wanted to shoot as many Mexicans as possible opened fire inside a Walmart. I'm pretty sure that many of our viewers are very aware of this. And beneath that, 5 people were stabbed during a Hanukkah celebration at the home of the Rabbi Chaim Rottenberg in Monsey, New York. This was December 28, 2020. The rabbi has since called for soul searching and countering hatred with love and goodness. Puedes sacar el slide, por favor, Oscar. Any comments on any of those slides before we get into some of the facts, Peter, of violence?
Only the sum total of them, Roy, how over the years, very little time goes by before some kind of an event of that nature occurs. And it's like waves coming in at the beach. You jump one, and that next wave is coming, and you hope you're in time to jump that second wave, and then the third. It just is. It's become relentless in their occurrence, but also in our minds. The title of this program, the violence on our minds. I think over time, it rests there and plays there with that expectation of when's the next wave coming in. And that's a difficult thing for many people.
Well, it's precisely because of this that I think it's so important to remember these things and not forget them and memorialize them, at least on anniversaries. And that's an effort that I took to do after 9/11. So there has not been a year that's gone by, 20 years, after 9/11 that I did not in some way commemorate the event. I even wrote, I think you probably remember, a poem, the Firefighter Song, that I repost and republish every single year because of it. But the same can be said about many of these other many of these other things. Gay pride that was fairly recent. They're things that should be memorialized. And by the way, dear viewers, today is a Holocaust Remembrance Day. Some of you may be aware of it. If not, it's Holocaust Remembrance Day today. And I can share with my viewers that my mother and father were very much affected by the Holocaust. My mother, being that she was Polish, Orthodox, and she had traveled to France where she met my father. And it was during the World War II that the beginning of the occupation, where they were in Bordeaux, that they were together and they were involved in la résistance, the resistance. But many of my mother's family were sent to and perished in concentration camps. My mother was Orthodox Jew. My father Roman Catholic. And this coming Sunday, I have an older sister who lives in France, and she's coming to visit on May 1. And I haven't seen her since before the pandemic. And it's almost symbolic to me that she's coming right at this point in time where we have the Holocaust remembrance. So, things occur for a reason, and symbolism to me is important. And I think that this message is out there. And I'm going to leave it with that. I don't want to get too mystical, so I'll leave it with that. Let's look at some of the facts about violence. Okay, these are some things that I think are important for the viewers to know. Por favor, Oscar, el número 6. So just for your education, dear viewers, we have 5 criminal offenses: murder, non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, gang violence. Poverty crime consists of burglary, larceny. Property crime, not poverty crime. Property crime consists of burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. Violent crime, and you were talking about this, about the numbers and how, we see no sooner does something come to an end, something else is occurring. Violent crime has gone up since the pandemic. So far this year, 2022, there have been 119 mass shootings. Generally, a mass shooting, depending on which you look at the definition, is anywhere from 3 to 4 shootings. Okay, somewhere in that area. I don't want to get too technical, but there are different definitions. You can look up how the FBI deals with this. Levels of domestic violence, I know we've spoken about this, has increased globally. The pandemic has had a lot to do with that because, you know, you had the victims living with the perpetrators with limited opportunity to seek help. U.S. murders in 2020 increased violence in jails and prisons. The age is getting younger. We're starting to see 12 and 13-year-olds walking around carrying guns. Violence surged immediately after the murder of George Floyd. It's an ongoing issue for years where Black and Brown communities have continued to feel the devastation of gun violence. Look at another statistic. Major crimes in New York City are up 38% this year, 2022. Violence in schools is on the rise. Recent shootings have become more deadly. Here you mentioned one of the shootings. We have Parkland, Florida. 17 were killed, another 17 injured. This was February 14th, Valentine's Day. That's how I remember it. I remember it because it was on Valentine's Day. Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. These were little children. 28 deaths. This was December 15 and December 14. 2012 Columbine High School massacre, the one that you alluded to, Peter, resulted in the death of 15 people and injured 21. This was April 20, 1999. So far, there have been 27 school shootings this year. Continuation, por favor, Oscar, el número 7. Our FBI director, Christopher Wray, he pointed to the pandemic. We've talked about that. Repeat offenders and more juveniles that I mentioned in the last slide, committing violent crime as some reasons for the increase. Definition of hate crimes, it's a violent or property crime such as murder, arson, assault, or vandalism motivated by bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. The United States Department's Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates an average of 250,000 hate crime victimizations each year since 2004. Peter, that number is staggering. 9 out of 10 hate crimes involve violence. In a quarter of the cases, the offender has a weapon, and approximately 60% racial bias is the motivating factor in most hate crimes. And there I give you the source, the National Institute of Justice. Puede sacar el slide. That's a lot, so I do encourage the viewers to have taken either photos or screenshots by tomorrow. Peter, anything to comment on this? I tried to give a fair appraisal of what's out there. Certainly, statistics can fit a whole book in terms of numbers, and I didn't want to overwhelm, but I wanted to give a fair enough of a view for the viewers to realize what we're looking at and what the reasons are, and hopefully this will be a segue to what we talk about in terms of some of the issues involving how we are affected by it, disorders stemming from it, and what we can do to protect ourselves.
Roy, some of the things that jump out, I think one is the salience and the increase in hatred, and how that anger and that hatred is so commonly directed at a target that we consider the other, that person or those people that are different from me. And very often then it's followed by some degree of a violent manifestation. Another factor that really hits me is what I heard the other day regarding children. For many years, the number one killer of children was cars. And that was always the leading cause of deaths of young children and adolescents as well, car accidents and whatnot. Well, cars, over the years, we've gotten technically better at creating roads that are safer and different mechanisms in the car that help safety, laws that are passed to increase safety. And deaths by car accident, by vehicle, have been declining. And what's zoomed up by far to be number one now is children dying by guns, children and adolescents, and along with an increase in suicides by guns. So that was a statistic that I was startled by. I had no idea that things had become that extreme regarding gun deaths in children and adolescents.
I mean, it's really something. I know that we've been arguing back and forth for years about how things to do, and I don't want to get into the political arena, but obviously it's something that's heavily in the political arena, but it doesn't prevent us, the viewers, and you and I, and other mental health professionals from trying at least to do what we can to keep our patients, our viewers, and society safe. And that's where we're going to get into the risk management and
it's important, I think, to look at it as a safety issue, a health and safety issue, not a gun control issue or a political issue in that regard. But I think no one would argue with the idea of we've got to make children and adolescents and people in general safer when it comes to guns.
Yeah. Well, we have quite a number of, I think, very good recommendations coming down the road. Let's look at some of the emotional disorders. So, por favor, Oscar, el número 8. Some of this we've talked about before in other shows, so it'll be a little bit of a repeat. Post-traumatic stress disorder. I pretty much put that at the top, Peter, because I think it's the king. to me, it's the king of the emotional disorders. Even if you do not have formally a diagnosable, clinically diagnosable PTSD, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have PTSD-like symptoms. Yeah. And we're going to talk about some of those things: the recurrent recollection, the flashbacks, avoidance, heightened emotional reactivity. You're going to be seeing some of these. Depression, that's very, very common and very typical and should not come as a surprise. Specific phobias. You and I, Peter, have dealt with patients who have been in car accidents. They become transportation phobic. They may be afraid to be in cars or on buses or trains if it was a train accident. Airplanes, a bad airplane ride and or some incident that occurred on an airplane. Specific phobias. Right now, getting back to the subway attack of April 12th, you have people demonstrating subway travel phobia. A patient of mine has to walk to Penn Station to take the Long Island Railroad because she refuses to take public transportation. And she is afraid to be on the street also because cars, as you well know, at times do not respect the stop signs or the lights. And she has seen and been involved in those kinds of incidents. And that's, you develop a phobic disorder. And it can become very pronounced when you feel that I don't want to go anywhere and you stay home. So it increases your isolation. By increased isolation, you become more depressed. By staying in more and more often, anytime you do go out and a little minor thing happens, you run back in, and being isolated at home becomes reinforced. And over a period of time, you can have what some of us might refer to as either agoraphobia or agoraphobic-like kinds of symptoms that you really do not want to go out at all. Panic disorders. You hear panic disorder as an example. You hear the sound. You saw a railroad crossing accident. You hear the sound of the train blasting by, and all of a sudden you get panicked. Your heart starts racing. Something triggers. You can be at home and you hear a sound or some recollection. Your heart accelerates. You think you're going to pass out. You're afraid you're going to end up on the floor. That's a panic disorder. Adjustment disorders, they're lighter. They're lighter forms of anxiety and depression. It can also involve behavioral changes. People sometimes develop irritability, angry reactions. You start seeing some emotional, explosive kinds of reactions. I don't want to mention by name, but we saw what happened recently in the news, with a well-known famous actor who reacted, unfortunately, I think under the influence of anger. And TBI, traumatic brain injury, and neurocognitive disorders. This is pretty much for people who in some way were exposed to toxic chemicals, for instance, at 9/11, or even at the subway. The subway, that assailant, there was something in the air, in the atmosphere. There was that dust, that smoke. You're inhaling this stuff. It's not good for you. You're in car accidents, sometimes the gas, the airbags, these kinds of things can affect your brain. And if you had a back and forth motion of your head, whiplash type of injury, it can create these microscopic changes that affect your brain. And if you passed out, if you actually hit your head, or you're a victim of violence, somebody pummels you and beats you and kicks you about the head, it's not going to be surprising that you have a traumatic brain injury. Substance use disorders can be very prevalent. People will look for ways to anesthetize themselves, try to relax, try to somehow compose themselves. They may rely more on alcoholic beverages. They may rely more on tranquilizer drugs. If you're in a lot of pain, you may start developing dependence on opioids or OxyContin or different kinds of medications. And also there may be increased prevalence for illegal substances. Puedes sacar a slide. Peter, anything to comment on this? I gave, it's not necessarily, this doesn't cover everything on the spectrum, but I think it gives a fair summary of the basic kinds of disorders.
It does, Roy. And one thought is that, as we consider these various conditions, one common denominator, one common thread that I think tends to run through all of them is the feeling of loss of control. I don't have a control over my body. I don't have control over my feelings. In some instances, my behaviors. And that then tends to increase the panic and the anxiety and the depression, and the symptoms then reinforce themselves. So a person being able to find a way to once again increase their influence over their lives tends to be very helpful. So that loss of control is a common denominator, I think, through all of these conditions.
Yeah, that was one of the early cognitive behavioral kinds of strategies that we were exposed to in our studies. Learning, self-management and self-control kinds of techniques, and being able to pick up the, what's a cue, what message are we getting, how are we interpreting it, what can we do to intervene in the chain early before it becomes, the later you intervene in the chain, you can already have the incident take place. So you want to intervene soon, early. And in order to do that, you have to be aware. You have to be aware that you are experiencing something. Mm-hmm. So that's really part of the magic of our treatment. Let's look at some of the symptoms. Por favor, Oscar, el número 9. So with adults, we tend to see, and this is, typical in PTSD, intrusive thoughts, meaning intrusive recollections, flashbacks. It's almost like you're visualizing it with your eyes closed. It can be an image, it can be a smell, it can be a sound, it can be the sound of glass breaking in a car crash, or the smell of the airbags or smoke. Nightmares, these are very typical. Intense distress when reminded of the trauma, anything that reminds you of it. You watch something on TV and you see an accident, or like the patient I was telling you about, and she saw, another near accident, crossing on the crosswalk. And again, it reminded her of her own traumatic incident. Physical reactions to reminders, loss of interest in activities. You just don't want to do stuff as much. You become more morose, more uninvolved, disengaged. Disturbed sleep. You startle easily with sounds, noises. All of a sudden, you hear the doorbell ring and you may startle. Feeling guilty can be that you survived or you did okay, and somebody else, or your child or something, or somebody else didn't do as well. Survivor guilt would be, for instance, a particular type of this feeling guilty. Depression, very, very, very typical. And that should probably have been higher at the top. With children, separation anxiety, especially the younger children. They don't want to leave the side. More often the mother, but it's not necessarily the mother, whoever the primary caretaker is. Regression, children sort of like they go back a little bit. They become younger, acting younger in their behaviors. Fear of the dark, they don't want to be in the dark. Fear of sleeping alone. Somehow now they want to go into mommy's bed. They didn't before. Behavioral changes. They may become more isolated, more withdrawn, or the opposite. They may be becoming more aggressive. Behavioral kinds of disorders that are more along the lines of inappropriate acting out. Mood changes. You'll go from being relatively neutral. Somebody says something to you. Did you do your homework? You're always getting on my back, and all of a sudden you'll snap. Enuresis. This is loss of bladder control. Physical complaints, very, very typical. And changes in school performance. This is something that I really encourage all parents to be aware of, because this is very, very pathognomonic for something that's going on. And by that, I mean, when you start seeing changes in school performance, suspect something is wrong, okay? Something is going on. Puedes sacar el slide, por favor. Peter, anything to add to that fairly comprehensive, I think, list?
Yeah, indeed, Roy. I would mention also that another effect, I'm a sex and relationship therapist, psychologist, and the loss of libido and the impact that has on the primary relationship of the marriage, and the functional impact on how our relationships are affected, our ability to work, our ability. You mentioned the loss of interest in activities. The word being anhedonia. I get no enjoyment from life anymore. These have far-reaching effects on us interpersonally, with our family members, with our spouses, and ability to parent, and it sort of snowballs from there. So these various conditions and symptoms can be global and really, really devastating a person's life as much as any physical injury.
Okay, let's look at some of the psychological treatments that we've spoken about before and that are available. And I think I've added to the list a little bit. It fits in one page, so it should be, I think, pretty easy to or easier to assimilate. Por favor, Oscar, el número 10. Okay, so here, crisis intervention. I mentioned it's at the beginning. Where you're dealing with the onset of the crisis, like going back to the subway. What needed to be done? You had the first responders immediately there. They were dealing with people lying on the ground, bleeding. Dealing with the life saving. Life saving always comes first. You have to remove people from a burning fire. You have to remove, make sure they're breathing. Somebody's drowning. They passed out. You've got to do mouth to mouth. I mean, this is life saving. That starts first. Emotional first aid is where we start at the very beginning, immediately after the crisis. For instance, at the subway, these were people who were terrified. Oh my God, did something happen? They had no idea if there was anything going on outside of the subway. Was there a bombing that took place outside? How would you know? You wouldn't know. I mean, think about the kinds of fear. Am I going to see my family again? Am I going to be able to get home again? Am I hurt? What's happening to me? So they need like some immediate intervention and helping them to try just to recover from the immediate negative, scary, frightening, phobic impact of the disaster and go to the next stage. You need to go home now. You are going to a hospital now. An ambulance is taking you. These EMS workers will assist you. This is your next step. Do you need anyone to call a family member? Do you need help in these kinds of things? So that's what I had in mind in terms of the emotional first aid. Relaxation, stress management, Peter, we've talked about that. Relaxation therapy, biofeedback, hypnosis, EMDR, meditation, talking about the trauma. I really think people need to talk about it, not avoid talking about it, not hide away from it. Maybe at the beginning, you need a little bit of distancing. You don't want to force somebody, but you need to encourage. People need, in some way, they have to be eased into being able to talk about it. But talking about it at some point in time is going to be important and has a very good healing and curative effect to it. Develop a narrative about the trauma. Well, life happens. I was there. I'm here. I'm alive. It was intended for me to continue. Unfortunately, other people suffered. Maybe I can help. Maybe I can be involved. Maybe I can make donations to charitable organizations. Maybe I can start doing things that I haven't done before. Maybe I can pick up certain things I haven't done before. Maybe I can go out with my family more often, be more attentive to my children, change the narrative. Exposure strategies. You don't want to avoid. You want to be able to slowly but surely expose yourself to the car if you're in a car accident. Expose yourself to the work environment if something happened at work. Go back to taking public transportation. Correct mistaken beliefs. Anything that really, really didn't happen, you have some false premise about it, be willing to listen, consider the source. Okay, social media is not as reliable a source as a good scientific and professional association and organization. Education about the trauma, self-improvement courses. The more you really learn, there's so much stuff you can do on the internet now. There's so many things that are available and virtual. You don't necessarily have to rely on doing things face-to-face. Children, you need to consider their age, resilience. I'm going to leave that to you, Peter. Post-traumatic growth and pets. I've done shows on pets. Pets are wonderful. Pets are a gift. Pets have a way of lifting people. And if need be, recognize that there may come a time you need to seek professional care. Por favor, puedes sacar a slide. Peter, I'll leave it to you to give more details, okay?
Yes. In particular, Roy, I'd like to pick up on the notion of resilience, because that, as we think about it very simply, that's the ability to bounce back when these bad things happen that affect us profoundly. Coming back from it is difficult, okay? But having resilience is what helps. And sometimes we think of resilience as an inborn quality or we're just born with it. Resilience can be learned. And there are different factors that we could pay attention to that are relevant to resilience. And there are also ways of building it. So first, to touch on some of the factors, one is to develop a realistic plan. Okay, what's my way forward? Maybe I need help with doing that, but I need to think of what's the plan and then begin to execute the plan by taking small steps. I need to maintain my self-esteem and get my confidence back. Maybe something went wrong, or maybe I made a mistake that led to a major problem. Having the confidence and the belief that I can move forward becomes essential. How are my communication skills? If I've got good communication skills, that's going to allow me to access social support and to deal effectively interpersonally. Emotional self-management. How do I manage my feelings? What method do I use? What approach do I use to be able to deal with the feelings that I'm having about the event that occurred or anything that's going on in life? And going back to confidence, one way of building it that's very useful that I find is learning from your past. And more specifically, the way I tend to put it, Roy, is I encourage people to go to school on their history. Look back, and this bad event that happened is not the first adversity or the first bad thing that's occurred in your life. How did you go forward before? How were you resilient previously when you faced other adversities in your life? And then we talk about some specific ways further of building resilience. Okay, one, make connections. Okay, I can make connections by finding family, friends, organizations where I can receive support. But the other side of that also of those connections is I actually can get help by helping other people. So I could be the one who volunteers or offers help to others. We find that very often has a great benefit for the person that is giving the help. Okay. Avoid falling into a trap of pessimism. Now the bad thing happened, so everything's black, and I project what was a difficult present and I color the future as dark in that regard. I don't want to overgeneralize from a bad event and now make everything bad. I want to be able to say, no, this is, in some ways, this is more the exception, and keep it in that kind of a perspective. Change, life changes. One of the challenges, most of us don't like change or have a tough time accepting change. Sometimes when the bad thing occurs, the change is abrupt. All right. And it takes a while to work on the acceptance that maybe things are not going to be exactly as they were before. I've got to find my way forward in this new way with a different moment. How do I begin to move forward? Take some small actions. All right. Very often we think of this large hill we have to climb. Let me go up a few feet. Let me just deal with something more immediate and small. And after a while, I can start to feel like I develop a little bit of momentum in moving forward. Stay engaged. This is another important factor. One of the things that we will tend to do, and I see this with so many people that have been accident victims, either in car accidents or work accidents or other situations that have seriously affected their lives, they sometimes pull in and begin to self-isolate. All right. And that will then tend to make things worse. A brief period of that is okay. If it's prolonged, now it's a problem because you're cutting yourself off from any kind of social contact and social support. Stay engaged and be involved with people and with something. Then I often talk about the what I label as the uninvited opportunity, the opportunity to learn about myself. This bad thing happened. It was uninvited. I don't want it. I would never volunteer for it, but I didn't have a choice. This is something that I experienced that happened to me. What can I learn about myself? What can I learn about myself in the face of adversity? And maybe I can actually have some good feelings to see how I'm able to move forward, even in small ways. Trust your instincts. This is another way to build resilience. Sometimes you begin to doubt your judgment. You lose touch with your gut. That gut feeling, and you begin to doubt it or ignore it, and this builds a greater anxiety, get back to trusting that feeling and that sense that you have for things. Keep a perspective on the event, the bad event that occurred. There's a temptation to overgeneralize, to now extrapolate from the bad thing that happened to begin to color other things in that same way. Keep it concentrated on that event and don't overgeneralize from it and now think that's always how it's going to be or everything is going to be that way.
That's like a contamination.
It is like, it's like a fog that grows and now begins to affect everything in its path. Okay. And that affects the next item, which is being able to maintain a hopeful attitude. Okay. A bad thing has occurred. We're not going to whitewash it or eliminate it, but we still have to be able to maintain something of a positive attitude and to be hopeful for what's coming up, that it can be better, that things can go better, even though this bad thing occurred. And finally, take care of yourself. Pay attention to your habits, all right? Because now, being that I'm affected, and maybe I'm in pain, or maybe I'm depressed, is my eating gone bad? Am I eating not at all, or I'm eating too much, or I'm eating only the comfort foods, I'm gaining weight? Okay. Am I drinking? Am I starting to drink too much? All right. Or even am I taking drugs? Am I over relying on pain medication? Okay. These are things I want to pay attention to. Am I getting sleep? Sleep is so important in overcoming depression and getting rest. And one thing that I so encourage people to do, you had mentioned earlier, Roy, the development of the narrative. What's the story here? Well, one way of really getting to know that story and working on it is through writing. It can be so therapeutic to write about your experience and to begin to see what your role was in this experience and how you're emerging from it. What effect, what have I learned from it? How can I move forward with it? And to write about that. There's something magical about that, because the way I'll often talk about it is sometimes you get stuck with the thought in your head that continues to pound and generate the feeling. I call it the clothes dryer effect. You wash clothes and you put it in the dryer and it gets hotter and hotter, and it reaches that point where it makes that god awful buzz that reminds you, okay, let me open up the door and let the hot air out. Well, that process of opening up the door, I find, can happen for many people by writing the story. It's like somehow magically, once it comes down your arm and out your finger, you're relieved of that cycling of the same thoughts and the building of those negative feelings. So these are just some very quick notions on how we all have the capacity to further build and cultivate our resilience in the face of some of these very difficult life experiences.
Thanks, Peter. I agree very much about the journaling and writing. The writing, you can either try to focus on it and make it theme oriented. If you're not sure, just take a piece of paper, do it on the computer or your cell phone or whatever, and just start writing without anything in mind, and just naturally just let your mind flow. With some patients, I encourage them to keep like a specific diary documenting instances of headaches, or how often they go out, or instances of pain and degrees of pain. Rate the pain on a scale, rate the headache on a scale. Make a notation of what doctor you saw, when you saw the doctor, and what you talked about. Keeping a record of things, record keeping and writing things. You can also write what I did recently, write a letter. I wrote a letter to my right leg. I mean, I think you saw that. I was like very annoyed with my right knee and my right hip, and I decided, well, let me write a letter to my leg, and it was unplanned, very spontaneous, and it came out, and it was a very, very interesting experience. And I must share that later on, after I wrote the letter and I pretty much threw my leg under the bus, I sort of, felt a little guilty afterwards. And I said, my right leg is really not responsible for all of this. So I made peace with my right leg, and we sort of reached, some plan of, working together. And I think that was a very informative and therapeutic experience for me. And you can write letters. It doesn't obviously have to be the body part, but you can write a letter to a loved one or to somebody who passed away, or somebody you think you have unfinished business. You don't have to necessarily mail it, but just write. You can write a letter about what happened on the subway, or write it to somebody. Like, I'm glad you weren't here. I'm glad I had an argument with you that day and you didn't come with me. You would have been a victim. So that's really important. We need to go on. We only have a few minutes. Oscar, por favor, el número 11. We're going to look at some risk management. El 11. So this is risk management places of worship. It's more geared towards people who work there or who are involved with the place of worship. Obviously, you're not going to be setting up a watch program or creating safety and security team unless you actually, are an employee or work there. But if you do, this is, obviously very helpful for you to know this. But if you are somebody who who does go to a place of worship, there are things you need to be aware of: the lighting, the conditions, whether there's debris, who's hanging around, if people look suspicious that are going, what kinds of safety precautions seem to be in place. Are all doors open and people can walk in easily anywhere? Do you see people carrying baggages or knapsacks going there, or they're wearing a heavy coat in the middle of summer? Little things like that. If you see something you don't like, that's important. Por favor, el número 12, risk management in schools. This also is geared pretty much also to the teachers, the employees, security professionals. But again, if your parents, if your kids, you're going to the school, be aware of the lighting. That you should have light. If it's dark, alleyways, the grounds of the school should be free of debris. There shouldn't be cars broken down. People hanging around in the corner. It's stuff that you need to be aware of. There's stuff in the external and inside. Like, are the doors barricaded? Are there potential fire hazards with chains? You can't do this. There has to be some way of egress and some way of safety. And people can't be walking around the school. Strangers can't be walking around the school. So things like that from the standpoint of parents and students. Otherwise, for the professionals who are there, take a look at this a little bit more extensively tomorrow. Slide number 13, por favor, 13. This is an extension of the schools in terms of safety. I think for the viewers, keep in mind that there are special occasions, special holidays, Easter, Orthodox Easter. You have holidays coming up, Mother's Day. People may go to church. You have Christmas holidays, a special event, special occasion where you're going to probably have more people. Many people you don't know. If you go to a church, you go to a school, you expect to see people you know. How many strangers, how many are coming, how many vehicles are there, how many vehicles are pulling up. So consider the context. The next slide, por favor, 14. This is really what I think is very important for all the viewers. So I really want you to focus more on this one, because this one carries more weight for everybody. Risk management outside. What are the things you need to do to keep yourself safe on the outside? Know how to get to the destination. Plan ahead of time so you don't get lost. If you're driving, GPS it. If you're not sure, ask. Make sure that you do a dry run if necessary. Figure it out ahead of time so that you're not hopelessly lost. If you're in a car, you should have gas. Make sure your car's inspected and safe, and whatever you need to have your car functioning properly. Awareness, be alert and observant. Like I said before, it's not the time to be crossing the street, looking at your cell phone. If you're at a parking lot and you're on the at the edge of a parking lot, in a big building, top floor, in a corner that's dark, that's not the best time when you're carrying packages to be looking at your phone, fumbling for your keys. It's not the time to pull your wallet out and handle money. Things like that. Limit the number of items, packages carried, money, credit cards. You shouldn't have more than one credit card if you're going out, and have whatever money available that you need for the occasion. Phone charge lock. It's good if you have an app for a panic button. Always someone should know where you are. Somebody needs to know where you are, and maybe to check in on you, or you tell them, I'm going to check in. If you don't hear from me such and such a time, something's going on. So someone who knows where you are, know the area, routes where you're going, no obstructions in closing. You may suddenly go someplace and the street's blocked, and you have to figure out, oh my God, how am I going to get there? I've got to go around the park now. What am I going to do? Examine places you enter in terms of safety, debris, the lighting, things that I told you, location, public gatherings, peak times. If you're in an area with huge number of people, what kinds of risks might there be as opposed to 4 a.m, in a desolated area? Have a rapid safety crisis intervention plan. If something possibly goes wrong or could happen, what do I need to do to stay safe? Be aware of vehicles that appear to be out of control, like my patient telling me that a car went through the stop sign and people literally had to jump out of the way. She wasn't immediately in the line of danger, but she had to back off. You have to be aware of this. You have to be aware of things that seem to be not right. Be aware of the presence of law enforcement officers who can assist. Trust your gut, Peter. This is something you just said. If something doesn't seem right, don't ignore it. Chances are it's not right. Other things would be limit the amount, of alcohol consumption, things like that. It's probably not the best time or location or place to suddenly make new friends, and you have 3 new friends, you decide to go to a bar and hang out with them. So that increases your risk. It's all about decreasing risk. Puedes sacar a slide. Peter, anything to add to this before we get to the last slide, which is resources?
Just briefly, Roy, the title of the slide, Risk Management Outside, says it all. Outside of our awareness should go beyond our immediate, where it's a big picture awareness. And one of the things to keep in mind is the cell phone has us so absorbed that we're inside. And it takes down that awareness of our environment, that awareness of the outside. Are there any risks? Are there dangers? Are there things that I can anticipate? Well, if I've got my face in that phone, it can have a very negative consequence in reducing our awareness. So be aware of the use of the phone, manage it, also with safety in mind.
Yeah. I would also add, avoid going places or going out under the influence of emotions. If you're angry, you had a fight with somebody, that's not the best time to go out. Not the best time to pick up and run out, take a coffee and go somewhere. That's not the best time to do it. You need to calm down. You need to plan it out, and you need to compose yourself. Por favor, Oscar, el número 15. These are psychology resources. I'm on the left, Long Island Psychological Consulting. Dr. Canaris Peter is on the right. There you have his contact information, address, phone number. Centers for Disease Control, that's a wonderful source. I gave you there the link for violence prevention. It's very useful information. New York State Psychological Association underneath that. I've spoken about them before. The president, Barbara Kapitanakis. I'm giving her a shout out, and all the other executives as well. It's a wonderful organization. If you go to the website, You just look it up, look up Nurse Psychological Association. You'll get the website. And you see there's a lot of information for the public. And I've given you the phone number there. You can also contact psychologists if you need some sort of references or recommendations or treatment there, location and specialties. American Psychological Association, what Peter previously mentioned, that's the parent of all of the state and provincial psychological associations. Underneath that, Suffolk County Psychological Association. Peter, that's yours and mine. Regional Association in Suffolk County. They're a wonderful association. I'm giving you their phone number. The website, again, it's very easy to get a hold of it. Just type in Suffolk County Psychological Association. You can get the website and see the kinds of educational things that are available and things that are available to the public. All states have similar psychological associations you can look at. Puedes sacar a slide. So, Peter, we're reaching the end of the program. Any sort of parting comments for the viewers as we wrap up now?
Only, Roy, I'd return again to that notion of building resilience. I think we are living in times that really require it because, hopefully we're going along and things are okay. But in our modern world, there's always that next thing that we can't fully anticipate that sort of hits us from the side. And having a resilient mindset and tools that are consistent with that, that we have available to be able to utilize, so important in our modern world. And we can all do it.
Okay. Don Oscar, algunos saludos. Oscar's wishing everybody to have a wonderful weekend. And for me, I'd like to just give the message that you cannot avoid life. You have to live life. You can't avoid life. And living life is not a bad thing. It should be pretty much a good thing. You have the tools, you have things you need. It's part of this resilience and part of the having this attitude of a glass half full as opposed to half empty, that will guide you in terms of going forward. Think of every day. Every day is a clean slate. Every day is a new day. Every day is a new gift. And I think that we have the resources, the abilities, and the tools at our disposal to live our lives. You don't want to avoid lives. With the travel anxiety and getting back to the April 12th subway attack, which prompted this show, you cannot, don't avoid, don't feel obligated to stay away. Be careful. The reality is you need to exercise care, be aware of your surroundings, develop that resilience, make sure that you do what you can to stay safe and live life. Don't avoid it. Live life. You got Mother's Day around the corner now. I want to give a shout out to all the mothers of the viewers. Really have a wonderful and safe Mother's Day. There's going to be a lot of traffic out there, a lot of potential exposure to alcohol. Be safe. The message: be safe. Be aware of your environment. Be aware of your neighbors. Keep your community safe. Be on the lookout for things that are not helpful. Know when to seek or when to ask for help if you need to. And other than that, Peter, thank you for being such a dear friend and a good colleague and a wonderful guest and consultant.
Thank you, Roy. My pleasure.
So with that said, I'll catch all of you in the month of May, and also happy Cinco de Mayo for those who will celebrate Cinco de Mayo before Mother's Day. So buenas